We were the lucky country. We went camping on weekends. We played cricket in the park with the family. We spent time making memories that would last forever. Now we have lost our jobs, our homes, our businesses, and our lives. Our state and federal governments have taken our rights away, destroyed our freedoms, and have been ruling by decree in the name of safety. This is not the new normal. We will not watch our country be run by bureaucrats. We will stand up and we will fight back. It is time to mark the day that matters to every single Australian. That day is Freedom Day. On the 4th of December, we will rise for freedom over fear. We will demand an end to the lockdowns, an end to the state of emergency, and we will demand real leadership. The Liberal Democrats will rise for our day of freedom. We will rise to end the state of emergency. We will rise and take our country back. Will you rise with us on Freedom Day? Freedom Day, December 4, 2021. Join the fight for freedom. Join the Liberal Democrats.
Authorised J. Humphreys, Mount Weatherly, Victoria.
Welcome to this week's episode of Liberty Chat, the Liberal Democrats weekly podcast and YouTube episode where we discuss all things liberty or lack thereof around the countryside and internationally as well. Obviously, this is a very special weekly event that we have for members of the party. And then we record this and it gets out onto YouTube and Podbean for your podcast apps for everyone else to check out. So obviously, if you're listening to this, please do go to our website, ldp.org.au, join up, volunteer, donate. We've got a lot of work to go on, but we've got two of our special panellists here today, Mr. David Limbrick in Melbourne. Hi, David.
Hi, everyone.
And we also have Mr. John Ruddick in Sydney. Hi, John.
Good evening. Nice to see you all.
My name is Kirsty O'Sullivan, and you may notice that we are missing one person, one of our regular panellists, Mr. Campbell Newman, who's our lead Queensland Senate candidate. We do have a little clip from Cam that he filmed today. He's actually at an event on the Gold Coast, a very special event on the Gold Coast tonight. So we've got a little clip about a big announcement that the party had this week.
A number of people have asked, why have the Lib Dems done a preference deal with Clive Palmer? And why were you involved in that, Campbell? Well, a bit of an explanation about all that. Firstly, we need to actually have preference deals, tight preference deals with all minor parties if we're to get anywhere in this upcoming federal election. In fact, if we're going to provide real leadership, we need to support and indeed cooperate with one another to make a real difference. That's a simple political fact. In terms of philosophy, the United Australia Party and ourselves have quite a few overlapping common issues. We're all against vaccine coercion, we're against the closure of borders, vaccine passports, and a whole lot of the authoritarian things that we've seen from state premiers, indeed from the federal government over the past 2 years. So there is some commonality in terms of what we're about. In terms of the disagreement between myself and Clive Palmer, well, that's a matter of the history, but we're prepared to put that behind us, and indeed we strongly believe that Australia's future is more important than any bad blood between us, and we've put it very firmly behind us. Then there's the issue of the resources that the UAP is going to have. Quite practically, they will have people on the ground in polling booths and locations that we couldn't possibly man at this time, and it's great to at least have people handing out a how to vote card urging a second preference for the Liberal Democrat candidate. And I guess it's also important to note that they've got considerable advertising firepower, which they're directing it against the Coalition, the Greens and the Labor Party, and that will actually help drive votes, we hope, towards us as well as the UAP. So it's important to have this agreement. We're going to do deals with other minor parties. John Humphreys is quite clear about that, and this is the first one and an important one to announce. So I hope that makes sense. And anyway, we look forward to your feedback as we go forward about how this works out. Cheers.
I do thank Campbell for doing that. I rang him up and said, I need a little clip, Sims, you're not going to be here. So he did that in the car on the way to the Gold Coast. Yes, it's very big news for the Liberal Democrats. John, you also had a very big day yesterday. Tell us what happened at your end.
Well, my wife and I got up early, drove down to Canberra, and Craig Kelly had invited me a week earlier. And I was speaking to Craig on the way down there, and I said, mate, how many people do you think are going to turn up to this press conference? Because Parliament House right now is a ghost town. The only people there's no staff. The parliamentarians are only allowed to be there. They're not allowed to bring any staff. And so it's pretty quiet. There's a few journalists, but not as many as usual. And Craig and I were about to say, look, they might just want to be rude to us and snub us. Anyway, so we thought, anyway, we'll come down and we'll do it anyway. And anyway, we turned around the corner quite pleasantly. There was about sort of 6-7 TV cameras and, at least a dozen sort of journalists. And look, I've got to say, Craig Kelly was in very good spirits. He's feeling very happy, feeling confident, I would say. There we are.
Great photos there, by the way.
Thank you. Yes. And look, I've got to say, it's been received very positively on social media. Very happy with that. Look, I think what needs to be said about Clive Palmer is some people can have a go at politics and then fail and then they walk away. Now, I'm an admirer of Corey Bernardi. There's certainly things we disagree with him on, but on economic policies, he's basically one of us. He's pretty libertarian on economic policy. And Corey put his conservative Australian Conservative Party together, gave it his best shot, and it bombed out. And then Corey walked away. Now, Clive Palmer at the last federal election put in tens of millions of dollars, did not get that many votes, and to his enormous credit, he says, "Well, I'm not giving up." And now he's got a fair bit of momentum. I was at a rally on the weekend. I got to say, a lot of people wanted to come up and say hello to me and get a selfie with me, but I mean, Craig Kelly was 10 times me. He was a real absolute rock star. And look, I think the key point. Look, I'm very happy about this arrangement. And as I said in the press conference yesterday, I said, look, the Liberal Democrats have been around for 20 years. We are very much a philosophy-based party. We approach everything asking ourselves what's going to minimise the state, what's going to maximise the power of the individual. We believe in that because that's what human history tells us. That's what works.
Yep.
And I said Clive and Craig, they really approach things from a common sense point of view, from a practical point of view. They're not so much of a philosophy-based party. But we have arrived at this federal election. We have arrived at the same conclusions on the three big issues, which is the overreaction to COVID, challenging the global warming orthodoxy, or particularly the responses to it from the government, and the enormous debt. So look, they feel very strongly about those three issues. We feel strongly about those three issues. We do complement each other in many ways. And look, the other thing, often little minor parties can have quite a lot of animosity between them, sort of like factions in the Liberal Party. The left and the right of the New South Wales Liberal Party are only about 1 or 2 rungs down from Catholics and Protestants in the 1970s in Northern Ireland. Okay, now, they're not killing each other, but they're only 1 or 2 steps away from it because they absolutely hate each other's guts. I've got to say, the Liberal Democrats, the United Australia people, Pauline Hanson people, a couple of other little groups. From what I can see, there seems to be very goodwill, good relations, and look, and happy that if others can get ahead. So, look, I think it was a very positive day. I was very happy with it, and Craig Kelly was always a bit like me. He's always a fish out of water in the New South Wales Liberal Party because he was obviously on the right of the Liberal Party, but the right-wing faction hated his guts because he wouldn't be told who to employ. He wouldn't be told what to do. So they hated him. And, it's basically because he was a true believer in causes. And, I've been good mates with him for a long time. And I thought yesterday was a big step forward for all of us. Yeah,
well, we certainly have been swamped with emails, a lot of support for it. And as Patrick says in the chat here, he says, I wouldn't have been supportive of the move 2 years ago, but it was the right move. The big issues are too important at this stage. And that's where I'm at too. There's a lot of people saying preference deal is very, very sensible. Now, David, John did just mention Saturday's protests around the place. And obviously we were all at the Melbourne rally, which was amazing. And you were definitely the rock star there. Never mind Craig Kelly. No one even cared about Craig Kelly. It was all David Limbrick. David was swamped trying to walk down just 2 kilometres down around Burke Street into Flagstaff Gardens. David, tell us a bit more about that and what you've been getting up to over the last week.
Yeah, so Saturday it was wild. I think it's the biggest protest I've ever been to, and I've been to a lot, as everyone would know. I think it's hard to know how many numbers there were. I'd say easily north of 100,000. Some people were saying 400,000. I'm not sure it's that high, but look, I mean, we started from Parliament and it went all the way down to Burke Street to Elizabeth Street, snaked around the corner and into Flagstaff Gardens. Now, I was pretty late appearing, so I was sort of at the back of it, and I was getting a message from someone saying that they're already finished and they're at the front. So the back and the front were all occupied at the same time. That entire area was full of people. So this was just huge numbers. I think previously the biggest protest I'd ever been to was actually the Gulf War protest back in the night. I think it was 91. That was back when I was a student. This was bigger. But look, I mean, like lots of people know the Liberal Democrats, which is great. We had a bunch of volunteers there who were along with me, and they were all wonderful. Some of them were wearing shirts, carrying signs and stuff like this. We were talking to people about our message and things like that. Lots of people knew me, as Kirsty said. They were coming up to me, and it's actually getting quite difficult for me to walk around the city now. So that's a good thing. Look, the crowd was really diverse. They're there for lots of different reasons.
Yes.
Was very peaceful. I didn't see any sort of trouble, and I didn't hear of any trouble from anyone. The only thing was there was an incident out the front on the front steps. When I came back, I didn't actually witness the incident, so I won't comment on it. But I'm not sure exactly what happened. But I mean, basically, there was nothing going on. I think people paid attention more to bad messaging and things like this. Like a lot of these people, I think a lot of people said this, a lot of these people that are out there have never been to a protest before in their life.
Yes, that's right.
They're not activists, they're not protesters, they're not, they're just people that have had enough and they hit the streets. And I reckon a very large proportion of the crowd were like that. I tried to talk to as many people as I could. There was a lot of mums, I noticed that.
A lot of women. I'd say probably easily half women of all ages.
A lot of women. A lot of women. And people from every different background. Like what really surprised me is lots of immigrants, and people were carrying the flags of the countries that they came from, that they immigrated from.
There were so many flags. Yeah,
there was flags of all different countries, which that was nice. And I didn't see any nooses or threatening messages and stuff like that. I know at one of the rallies there was something like that, and of course people have realized that the media just latches on to there's a bad image or something that we saw it a while ago. There's if there's someone does something bad, that's what the story will be. And I think people have sort of wised up to that a bit, and they've toned down some of the silly things that people were doing, like the nooses and stuff was just silly, like threatening things like that, and especially, for a political party like us, we're preaching about, non-aggression and peace and stuff, right? We don't want people to be threatened and talk about things like that. We want to talk about, we're trying to stop coercion. Like that's the whole point of our party, right? And that's what we're trying to do with, what we've been talking about, the campaigns and stuff. We're trying to stop coercion, and I don't want to be associated with people that threaten other people. It's not what we do. And
one of my favorite posters was one that said, it's bad when even the introverts have come out. And so I thought that was pretty cute as well. But yes, David can confirm was swamped. And then at the end at Flagstaff Gardens, it was a real festival experience. It was fun. There was, beach balls floating around, and the weather was fantastic. Thank you, Melbourne. It was beautiful. It was a great day.
Yeah, it was beautiful weather. I got a little bit of sun, as you can probably see. But Yeah, look, I think you know, for us as a party, I chose not to speak at this. I didn't try and get up on the stage or anything like that. You know, I don't know what the other people are that are going to be speaking there, and actually, I couldn't even hear the speakers. Like the crowd was just so big that I couldn't even hear what was going on. So, I mean, it was just good for us, I think, to go out and talk to people and listen to their concerns, and you know, share our experience, our truth, because we witnessed it and we were there. And you know, when the media comes out and says, you know, they're all right-wing fascists or something, we can say, well, actually, that's not true. That's just, you know.
And David, what is the latest on the bill vote? I know it's been postponed, but can you give us a very quick rundown on where it's at right now?
It's in stalemate at the moment. So anyone that's been watching Victoria, Adam Somyurek was the Labor member who resigned from the Labor Party. So he's an independent now in Parliament. And for some weird reason, the government never envisaged the situation where he might come back and exercise his vote. And so they didn't secure an extra vote on the crossbench and somehow just relied on him not turning up, which is incredible for people that are demanding emergency powers like this. Like, is this the sort of people that you really want to trust with those sort of powers? So the government panicked and they delayed the bill, and it's possibly going back next week. They've been saying that they're going to negotiate with other crossbenchers and stuff, but I'm not sure how they can break this sort of deadlock that's going on, because I've been seeing what the other crossbenchers have been demanding, and much of it is way beyond where the government would go, I think. Like, you know, Catherine's Cummings said, yeah, I'll support it as soon as they get rid of vaccine mandates, right? Which, you know, that would be good.
Yes.
And other people have said, you know, I want it supported by, you know, all these organizations and stuff, which seems like a big ask. So we'll see what happens next week, but the government's running out of time here. So I don't know what's going to happen. Like, the bill either needs to come back as something different, or someone needs to flip, or I don't know. There's other possibilities, I suppose. But
yeah.
When the bill was delayed, was that just a government decision, or did that require a vote of the upper house?
That required a vote. But Adam wasn't in the chamber at that time, so the vote passed. And actually, one of the upper house members, Catherine, she voted to delay it, and she wanted to delay it because I think she was concerned that Adam wasn't there, and therefore the government might try and race through it or something. So I think that was her reasoning. So but we didn't vote to delay it. We wanted it to proceed. But yeah, anyway, but it won. They won the vote to delay the bill, and then it's going to come back at their choosing, I suppose.
Okay, well, we might move on now. We have two very awesome guests tonight on two completely different topics. Our very first guest tonight is a man who needs no introduction. So here he is. No, I'm going to introduce him. Professor Sinclair Davidson. You could talk about Sinclair. People have been asking desperately for a blockchain cryptocurrency chat on Liberty Chat, and we have brought you the best right here. I can't even read all the things that Sinclair does, but he also is the RMIT blockchain at the RMIT Blockchain Innovation Hub. He's an adjunct fellow at the IPA, he's at the CIS, he's at the ATA. Anywhere that's good and promotes liberty and blockchain and good information, that's where Sinclair is. Welcome to Liberty Chat, Sinclair, and thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, good evening. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Great to see you again, Sinclair.
I love that Sinclair is in one of his trademark loud shirts.
This is one of my quieter shirts, if I could just say. It's just
Oh, well, on the screen already, we have two of Sinclair's most recent books, The New Technologies of Freedom and Unfreeze, How to Create a High-Growth Economy After the Pandemic. So we're going to spruik those, obviously, for you as well, Sinclair.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Before we get started, where can people buy those books?
Off Amazon. So Amazon Australia, Amazon UK, Amazon in the United States. And get in early to avoid disappointment. They are great stocking stuffers for the Christmas season coming up.
Exactly. Now, Sinclair, why would people buy those books? What on earth is blockchain? What does it all mean to Australia? Please give us the too long didn't read version. You've got 2 minutes.
Yeah. Blockchain is magic on the internet. Blockchain was invented by a person or group of individuals called Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008, started mining and in 2009. That is the mechanism which underpins the Bitcoin, which of course we all know as the magic crypto money, the original money. Blockchain is actually the mechanism whereby they keep track of the Bitcoin. And the real innovation here is not that we have a new money or a different money or what have you. The blockchain itself industrializes trust. And so in exactly the same way, if we think back to the Industrial Revolution, we moved away from those obsolete sources of power, solar and wind and all those things, and human muscle and animal muscle. We actually moved towards industrializing power. And that has actually led to the great human flourishing, which we've observed over the last 250 years. That's when we industrialized power. Well, what we've done now is we've industrialized trust. Now, it is astonishing to believe that we think so little about trust because it is so ubiquitous in our world. But for example, how does anybody here know that I know anything about anything? And it's because Kirsty told you. But how do you know Kirsty? Because you saw her last week, and so on and so forth. So we have these long links of trust that bind us together as people, that allow us to interact, that allow us to trade. But this takes time, So if you think of like a bank, you go to a bank and what do you see? Big imposing buildings, heavy architecture, big safes, fat bars where all the money's in. These are all to create trust. And what we've got now is a technology that industrialized it. So we've now over the last few years, when I got into blockchain in 2017, we founded the Innovation Hub at RMIT. We were promising to revolutionize the world. And 4 years later, people can kind of say, well, gee, you haven't really revolutionized too much, have you? But what has happened in that time is that we've gone from blockchain and Bitcoin and smart contracts. We've now built NFTs, which is a way of actually creating digital twins, creating property rights on the internet. We've created stable coins, which is money on the internet. We're working on DAOs, which is creating organization on the internet. We're actually going to completely revolutionize how our economy works. And of course, not far behind the economy is society. We're going to revolutionize how society works. Now, I feel a bit embarrassed coming onto a political podcast with David, who's actually elected member, and John, who I hope will be an elected member fairly soon, and actually say, this is going to revolutionize politics as we know it too. So you two guys, I'm really sorry. I love you dearly. But a lot of what you do may become redundant over the next while because we still have in place an 18th century political system. And I've got this great cartoon, which in the bad old days I used to put up on Catalaxy Files from time to time, where I would have the Starship Enterprise and hooked behind it would be an old ox wagon. And the Starship Enterprise would be the economy and the ox wagon would be the political system. And so we've got a political system whereby our elected politicians are representatives. They're not our agents. So I can't say to David, I want you to do this in the parliament, because he can legitimately say, no, I will vote my own conscience. And we have that in place because in the bad old days, it was difficult to communicate what you wanted to your elected member of parliament. So I would have to write in longhand using quill and ink a letter, which I'd have to put onto a horse, which would ride 3 days to get to the nearest post office and post to David, and he would get it 6 weeks later. And meantime, the vote had already passed. So he had to act on his best judgment. We can now live in a world where in a blockchain environment, you can vote yourself. Or I could say, look, for most things, I'm going to trust David. He'll vote in my interest. But for this one thing, I want to vote myself. So we could actually revolutionize politics as we know it, in addition to revolutionizing money, revolutionizing organizations. And the most exciting thing, certainly from a libertarian perspective, is the way in which blockchain and crypto and all those other things is going to actually undermine a lot of the things which the government does. Because what the government does to a large extent is, in addition to ruling our lives and locking us in our houses and all this sort of stuff, the government acts in many senses as a central trust depository. You know, why do we trust the Aussie dollar? Well, because the government has issued it. Why do we trust it beyond that? Well, because they collect taxes in it. And why do we trust it after that? Well, if you don't pay your taxes, men with guns come to your house and drag you away. You know, we can actually break that nexus between the violence of the state and move straight into cooperation between people, because as a species, we actually cooperate more than we compete. And so that is the promise of crypto, is to actually live in a world of human flourishing, of voluntary cooperation that hasn't been possible in the past because we have these insurmountable trust problems. So this is the good news story out of crypto. So very often people say to me, you know, Sink, why have you given away proselytizing to people and working on all this crypto stuff? Because I actually think this is the best mechanism that we as libertarians have right now to spread the message, where we can say to a whole bunch of people who don't really know that they're libertarians or haven't thought about libertarians, but they do understand the value of voluntary cooperation. They do understand they don't want the government stealing their money or telling them how to live their lives. And crypto is the way we are going to reach out to those people. Certainly you can do far more explaining Hayek to people by saying, read Hayek on money, than you can about, oh, you know, philosophy, rota serfdom, which is all very good, valuable stuff, but it doesn't seem to impact people directly. That's where the other thing that has happened over the last 18 months, of course, is COVID. A lot of people have suddenly woken up to the fact that the government can lock you in your own house, can force you to have a vaccination, can tell you that you can't send your kids to school. I mean, what are these people thinking? But nonetheless, the government can do all of this and prorogue the parliament, so you can't complain. I mean, how shocking has this been? We've seen in the last 2 weeks when the parliament has been sitting, all of a sudden the government has not gotten away with all the rubbish that they've gotten away with before that. So this proroguing of the parliament has been an absolute disgrace. But now there are a whole bunch of people who have actually woken up to the fact that we don't live in a society of voluntary cooperation, that we don't live in a society under the rule of law all of the time, that in actual fact, there are people with guns who will come and intimidate you, who will issue you with a fine. If you don't pay the fine, they will send the sheriff to your house. I mean, we live in an inherently violent society. And I think people don't like it. They don't want it. They want to believe the story that we live under the rule of law. And that is what we've got to bring back.
Yeah, we do have a few questions here. And whilst we're talking about voting earlier, Alistair asked, Sinclair, do you believe we'll actually get to the point where blockchain is used for voting? Do you think that will ever happen?
Yes, not in the short term. Bearing in mind, one thing I do have to say with technology is that we do overpromise and underdeliver, certainly in the short run. So if you kind of think we're definitely overpromising what can be done in the next 2 years, but we're probably underpromising what can be done in the next 10 years. Okay. We do need to work very hard on getting the technology right. There are a few things that are impeding the adoption of technology, or this technology, in the public sector. One, even though it wasn't at all related to blockchain, the robo-debt kerfuffle that happened a couple of years ago, which was an absolute disgrace. It took anybody with intelligence about 2 minutes to work out what was going wrong here. And yet the government insisted for about 2 years that there was nothing to see here. And then also the kerfuffle last year in the American election, where everybody was saying, oh, you can't trust the machines. Now, maybe you can, maybe you can't. I don't know. That's all going through the courts and everybody's suing everybody else. But nonetheless, there is that trust problem around the machines. Can we do it? But certainly, I have no doubt in the not too far future, we will be voting online. We will be voting electronically. And one of the best things to discover that we will discover as Australians about that is that voting and valid voting in Australia is compulsory. You know, all these numpties who say to you, oh, no, you just have to turn up shit, they are going to be in a terrible surprise when they discover that you are actually required to cast a valid ballot under the law, and that will be written into the electronic voting. And then all of a sudden, there's going to be a whole bunch of people going to suddenly realize, gee, once again, the government's been lying to us. Who would have believed? But anyway, yes, so it is coming, but not immediate.
Sinclair, this idea of electronic voting. Now, a couple of people have brought up the issue in the chat. I note that there was actually a party that was trying to run a few years ago, Flux Party. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they had the idea that they'd have a computer platform that anyone that's in the area, in the electorate, can log into that platform and tell the MP how they should vote on things. And the idea was that the MP would effectively become a robot of the people, like a direct democracy sort of thing. Now, some of the people brought up, there was a few problems that I saw with that.
Yes.
Firstly is that the time investment required to understand a vote is huge, right? Like, especially on a bill. You know, I've got a team of people and we spend enormous amount of time trying to understand what's happening, but also we're not just about democracy, we're also about liberty, and there should be limitations on the power of the state to do things, right? And, you know, ideally we would like some sort of strict constitutional limitations, but, you know, how do you stop this idea of like a mob rule where, you know, you've got 90% of the population decides that, you know, let's say, forced sterilization is a good policy for this group of people that we don't like. How do you stop that in this sort of situation?
Combination of things. One, you may actually have hardwired into this a proper constitution, which actually limits the power of the state. Now, I think we've discovered here in Australia that the constitution is a complete joke. The state government hasn't taken its own Charter of Human Rights into consideration at all. Now, I mean,
well, they have, but it's been a tick box exercise. I've been very, very disappointed by the Charter of Human Rights.
It has been an absolute disgrace. Yeah. And even at the federal level, I mean, we have the federal government that is not enforcing its own interstate commerce clause, which again is absolutely disgraceful.
I always thought that was sacred, right? Like, I grew up thinking, you know, the Constitution in Australia doesn't have a lot of protections, but the ones that it does have are like fairly solid, and apparently not.
Well, I had lunch with some lawyer friends the other day, and they were saying to me, the words absolutely free do not mean absolutely free. I was thinking, gee, are we speaking a different dialect of English here? I mean, what's going on here? This is one thing where I have to say the American judicial system does actually have it right. The American judges will enforce the Constitution to the extent that sometimes you may think, gee, this is a bit of over-enforcement going on here. But nonetheless, we actually need to have judges with some backbone. And I just don't think we're going to get that in Australia. We may have to write in some sort of smart contracts to prevent those sorts of votes from coming up. The other thing is you can't actually have a situation where the member of parliament is actually some sort of robot, because at the end of the day, what is that member of parliament doing? So a model which Darcy Allen, Aaron Lane and Chris Berg have come up with is a delegation model, where effectively what we're having on a semi-regular basis are referenda. And I can delegate my vote. So I can say, look, David, I know you're a fairly sound guy in economics. I taught you myself. So on any economic issues, I'm going to let you vote. And I will delegate my vote to you. So you actually turn up on the day and say, I've got these 10 million people who have delegated their vote to me. I can cast 10 million votes for this particular thing. But I might say, gee, in my local area where the garbage gets taken away, I actually want to have control over the number of bins I've got outside my house. I don't trust you on that. So when it comes up to how many bins we're going to have in a month, I will cast my own vote, yes or no, or what have you. Or I could keep it all to myself, or I could give it all to you. But to actually empower people to vote themselves, where you would have people who would be delegates. But the delegate would have to vote in the direction which they say. That is a model which is more practical, perhaps, but certainly saying, I mean, if we're going to confront you with a situation where 51% of the people who you represent and 49% represent something completely different, it's hard for them to say, David, you've got to be a robot here. That is not going to work. At the same time, also, we need to have more discussion around a whole bunch of things. I mean, who had ever heard of public health legislation until we all got locked into our houses? So in actual fact, we have all been locked in our houses under legislation that the majority of the population didn't even know existed, let alone have an opinion on it. So
they used it for shutting down restaurants for food poisoning and stuff. Mostly.
Yes. And again, there's always this creep. It always starts off with, that sounds reasonable. We don't want people having food poisoning. Yeah, that's reasonable. But it's a short skip, hump, and a jump to from Peter Pan to get to, we're actually locking the population down, and you can't go more than 5 kilometers from your own house. I mean, my elderly German auntie was saying to me, this is worse than what it was after the war. What are these people thinking? It is just absolutely outrageous and disgusting. My argument is now, I can see that there's a lot of commentary.
I'm gonna ask the question very soon.
My view is that blockchain is going to disrupt all the power structures, authority structures, and centralization in our society, in our economy, in our politics that libertarians hate so much. So if you're a libertarian, you should be into blockchain. Just saying. And buy my book, by the way. Buy my book.
Definitely.
Not that I'm biased to anything.
There is a lot of questions and chat in there, and I'm hoping that Sinclair will get in those chat boxes and answer a lot of those questions. And but there is just one question that I do want to put to you, and hopefully you'll answer it very quickly, Sinclair. So there's a comment and a question here from Benjamin, who says, through the 2000s, advocates of the public key infrastructure tried to apply it to every IT problem. It frequently appears that advocates of blockchain similarly view it with an almost cultish fervour as a solution to every problem. Consequently, I struggle to get excited by blockchain, as it looks like many of the other funky technologies that have come and gone. Why is blockchain different? Why should I give up my cynicism and believe that blockchain is more than a fad? Sinclair.
That's a good question.
No, it is a great question, because as I said before, in technology space, we overpromise and underdeliver. It is a good question because this time we've got a story as to why it's a good story. And our good story is the industrialization of trust, which I told before. The other story is that in blockchain, the same as everywhere else, we overreached in the beginning and we told stories that we couldn't deliver on. Now, if you think back to what actually happened, people started off by saying Bitcoin is a money, but Bitcoin is not a money. It does not have the characteristics of money. The store of value, which people talk about in Bitcoin, is not correct. So a lot of people got turned off by that. It is not a money. The other thing is that people from having developed Bitcoin and smart contracts, they jumped to developing organizations. But before you can have organizations, you have to have property rights. And so now we've developed property rights. We have developed actual monies. So what we've been doing in the last few years, since 2017, is building the building blocks that you need to build out an economy. We now have those in place, and that is what's happening now. I work on a lot of projects where people are actually bringing sensible business ideas, not scams, not frauds, not the usual bullshit, not money laundering, all those things that sort of characterize early adoption of other technologies. That's all now in place. There was something else profound I was going to say that in my ranting I've come back. I'm sure
it was very profound.
Yes.
Once again, give us the names of those two books, your last two books, Sinclair, and where can people buy them?
So on Amazon, Unfreeze, How to Build a High Growth Economy After the COVID. And the other one is The New Technologies of Freedom, also available on Amazon. And a big shout out to Ron Manners and the Mankell Foundation, who actually sponsored Chris and Darcy and myself writing that particular book. Yeah. So thank you very much, guys.
The legend that is Ron Manners. We are all big fans.
Absolutely.
And can we follow you on Twitter, Sinclair?
Yes, you can, at Sinclair Davidson on Twitter. And bearing in mind that I'm very often retweeting crypto stuff, and when politicians annoy me, I tell them. And
that sounds good to me.
And anything else that sort of captures my fancy or sarcastic comments that I make all goes up on Twitter. So yes, at Sinclair.
Wonderful. And I thank you so much. We thank you so much for joining us today, Sinclair. As I said, I hope you stick around in the chat box there. Thanks again, Sinclair.
Will do. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Now we have gone a little bit over time, but so of course we must bring in blistery history from Mr. John Ruddick. You are going to have to give us the very succinct version. Please, what is the subject this week?
Well, I wanted to talk about the White Australia policy and use it as an example of how you can have a situation in the country, Australia, where all the political parties, all the media, public opinion, and the medical establishment, the scientific establishment, can all be on one side and the libertarians can be on another side. And with the passage of time, the libertarians are proved correct. So we had our first federal election in this country in March 1901. There was 3 political parties that got elected. The Labor Party was absolutely rabid about the White Australia policy. They were extremely pro the White Australia policy. Now, then you had the protectionists who were also who formed the government after that election, people like Edmund Barton and Alfred Deakin. Alfred Deakin was really running the show. Now, when the Free Traders were the official opposition. Now, when the government, the first Parliament was held in Melbourne in May 1901, and it was there for about 30 years. The second piece of legislation that was introduced to the Parliament was called the Immigration Restriction Bill. And that, I'm pretty sure that is the longest debated bill in the history of the Australian Federal Parliament. It goes for about 600 pages in Hansard, and it took about 5 months to pass. Now, that wasn't because it was contentious. That was because almost everybody wanted to get up there and tell the public how much they love the White Australia policy. Now, people like Edmund Barton and Alfred Deakin, these people were not just saying that we want to stop non-whites coming into the country. A big part of the White Australia policy was to get rid of people that were already here. Now, you had some Chinese people here who had been here for 2 or 3 generations, and the policy wanted to round them up and export them, but not get rid of them, which is pretty cruel because these people really didn't have many places to go. Now, then what happened was the Free Trade Party, who were basically, our ancestors in the Liberal Democratic Party, people that we spoke about, George Reid just a few weeks ago, even the Free Trade Party and even George Reid were largely in favour of the White Australia policy, although they were clearly reluctant to talk about it, but public opinion was so in favour of it. Now, the number one thing, I want to get to the Free Traders in a moment, but this is the really important thing. You read the Hansard about what they were talking about. They were all saying, the science says. We've heard that somewhere before, haven't we? The science says that we can't mix these people. The science says that they're going to degrade this country. Okay, now, there was one heroic figure, and his name was Bruce Smith, who I did incorrectly on the weekend say was the member for Wentworth. Here he is, there's good old Bruce. He was actually the federal member for Parks for the first 20 years after Federation. He's the only person that voted against every measure of the White Australia policy. And he was a really hardcore libertarian. He first came to prominence in about the 1880s. He wrote a book called Liberalism and Liberty. And he spoke so beautifully about the White Australia policy, saying, look, this is insane what we're doing. He said, well, here we're on the doorstep of Asia. There's so many educated people there. He did say, look, we're a big continent. We've only got 4 million people. We're a young country. We obviously don't want to be flooded. And, it's not a bad idea to have a large degree of homogeneity at the beginning. However, there's lots of people, and he was saying from Japan, from China, from India, who can come here and can enrich us. The Labor Party was saying that they wanted to prohibit even tourists or scholars to come out to this country, like teaching professors, just on a talking to her. He said they're not allowed here. Now, Bruce Smith was hated, and the press hated him. The scientific establishment hated him. But he said, look, I know I'm right. And I think with the passage of time, we would say that he was right. So when we, being where the position that we have at the moment, it's almost like we're defenseless. There's no institutions on our side who are people who are standing against mandatory vaccines. But I'm confident, like Bruce Smith, we hold the line. We are going to be vindicated because it's so obviously correct that the position that this party is taking on that very divisive issue now, we're right, and the entire establishment is wrong once again.
Wow. Okay. That was pretty spicy, John. Pretty controversial.
Well, look, it's an issue that people, people don't realise how big that policy was early on in the history of the Commonwealth. Well, and who was the free traders? Were the free traders once again were the good guys, the people who believed in liberalism.
Yes. Well, there's a comment here from Philip saying, this history lesson needs to be edited and posted by Lib Dem social media. Imagine the number of people getting triggered. Yes. Now, we do have a second wonderful guest tonight, Dr. Chris Schneider. I'm just waiting for him to turn on his camera. Welcome, Chris. Now,
Chris, nice to meet you.
Chris is a gastroenterologist here in Melbourne. He's Canadian, as you'll tell very soon from his wonderful accent, working a lot with medicinal cannabis. And I wanted to bring Chris in because obviously, our party has always had a legalized cannabis policy, which some people don't always agree with, and we'll explain that a bit later. But there has also been further developments, particularly in the world of cannabis in Germany this week. And obviously you work a lot with medicinal cannabis. So welcome, Dr. Schneider.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, really interesting speakers. I'm used to living in the world of medicine, so it's all data and studies.
Well, we went from blockchain to the White Australia policy, so yeah, that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Very interesting topic. So it's good. It's very refreshing for me to hear.
So tell us a little bit, Chris, what kind of work that you do in terms of the medicinal cannabis use that you do with your practice.
So I'm a gastroenterologist. So I prescribe and I study the effects of medicinal cannabis on digestive diseases. And so I see patients with Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. I also see them with just generalized abdominal pain that still needs to be sorted out. Irritable bowel syndrome is another big one. And we use different types of cannabis. So that I'm sure many people in this group are aware of, the difference between CBD and THC, and then there's the terpenes. So there's different types of chemovars that you'll use to try to help out and to relieve their symptoms, reduce the nausea. And then often with a lot of these digestive diseases, there's a mental health component to it. So a lot of people are affected with anxiety and with reduced sleep. And so the medicinal cannabis is pretty great in the sense that you can use it as one single drug if you use the right dose and the right ratio to treat many different conditions where normally you need multiple medications to sort that out for the person. I'm also doing a research study in Australia called the Calm Gut Study. And it's actually the largest IBS trial in the world at the moment. And if we publish it, it'll be the biggest series. And we're looking at the effects of CBD oil. So the purified CBD oil that's going to be potentially sold over the counter in Australia. And we're looking at effects on IBS because we think that'd be a great application for over-the-counter use.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. What do you think, obviously with the news in Germany this week, or we might want to explain the news in Germany this week and how that will affect Australia and the use of cannabis within Australia?
So this week, Germany, kind of surprised the whole world in the sense, at least the whole cannabis world, that they've since 2016, they've had medicinal cannabis legalized. And for the longest time, the German politicians were saying that they were just going to focus on medical. So it was a purely medically driven kind of industry there. And it was one of the largest in the world. And so many companies in Canada and the United States, well, actually less in the United States, but Canada and other parts of the world, including Australia, with some companies like Little Green Pharma out of Perth, were shipping lots of cannabis to Germany. But then this week they announced that they're going to, as of next year, they're going to legalize it for recreational purposes. So that means people won't have to go through the whole scrutiny of getting a prescription and getting, having to justify it for a medical reason. They can self-medicate, or they can just, they can use it for recreational purposes, to relax on the weekends or after a hard day's work. And so that's going to be very similar to Canada. It seems like the framework where they'll have dispensaries, and it'll be regulated, it'll be tested, it'll be safe, and it'll be accessible for everyone. So it's pretty exciting news for I guess for Germany, I think.
What are some of the, like, for people who aren't really aware, obviously you're working in the gut issues, but what are some of the issues, some of the diseases or illnesses that medicinal cannabis can treat, for example? People often just think, if they're not really aware, they're just thinking that it's about, smoking weed and chilling out on the couch. But what is it actually used for? What is cannabis, the plant, used for?
So it works through a system called the endocannabinoid system, which was actually described in the Palestinian territories in the Middle East, and it was described in the 1960s. And so it basically is a signaling system through our nerves, and it helps regulate the nervous impulses, and usually down regulates it. So there's certain areas where there's sort of cannabis is divided into, actually basically everything in medicine is divided into strong evidence, moderate evidence, and weak evidence, and then no evidence. And so where there's strong evidence in medicinal cannabis, where there's multiple randomized control trials, where these trials were reproduced by different groups and they found the same results, is in the areas of the following areas. So there's one with childhood epilepsy. So these young kids that unfortunately get these seizures and are often refractory to many different medications, and the medications that they do work with are often very severe and they cause lots and lots of side effects. So especially CBD oils, the non-psychoactive component, is very effective at that. So strong evidence in there. Another strong evidence in people undergoing cancer and chemotherapy, both in helping them gain weight and improve their appetite, as well as decreasing nausea. So that's another big one. And then the last one is in chronic pain. And so people with severe intractable pain, not responding to opioids, cannabis plays a role in that. And so and that's more of the THC containing component. And then other areas where there's moderate evidence is in my field. And you can see that we're researching and trying to gain more, better understanding of this, is in the case of IBS and Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Definitely reduces symptoms, at least. And there's a thought that in things like colitis, it may also reduce inflammation. And there is some initial studies to show that. Then there's in areas of MS, so people with spasticity and helping relax the muscles. Veterans, it's a very big area in terms of the PTSD, and it's mostly the dried flower that they're using, and there's evidence for that. And the list goes on. It's anxiety, sleep. They're all areas where it's emerging, and there's actually fairly decent evidence. It's still put in the moderate category. And then there's areas that are there's others smaller areas where people are looking at it. But since it works, the endocannabinoid system is all throughout our body. It works. It has multiple functions, and so as a potential therapeutic tool, it's pretty exciting. Where there's no other medications. You look at like Lipitor that made Pfizer tons and tons of money. It was just on cholesterol. And even that was a multi-billion-dollar drug. And here you have a drug that could have multiple indications. There's a lot of interest in that, I think, from the medical field as well as from the pharmaceutical industry.
Thanks so much, Dr. Schneider, for coming today and telling us about what you're doing. It's fascinating stuff. I've been in contact with a bunch of people in Melbourne who involved in medical cannabis, and I haven't heard a lot about uses for gut issues, which is really fascinating. I'd be interested to hear from you. What are some of the barriers that you see in, like, the legal barriers to either doing research or getting drugs or things over the line in this area, because it's only fairly recently that we've had the legalized medical cannabis in Victoria, and I've had reports to me that the system is very clunky and difficult for people, and the government, to their credit, has actually been trying to improve that, is my understanding, but it's been difficult, I've heard, for patients to also get access to
Absolutely. No, I mean, without, it could be, I could talk, to take an hour to explain the whole thing, but ultimately what you have to do is you have to get a clearance from the TGA, which is the Therapeutic Goods Administration. And then in Victoria, and only in Victoria, you, and I'm, that applies to me because I'm in Melbourne, you have to get a state permit as well. So you have to apply to 2 separate locations to get access to medicinal cannabis. Now, the state permit is only for THC containing compounds, not CBD. So you don't do the state permit for that one. So there's a lot of intricacies on that, but it takes about 10 minutes to 15 minutes to fill out the form, especially once you're getting good at it. So you can imagine in a busy bulk billing GP practice, somebody comes in, they're like, oh, can I get medicinal cannabis? There's no way it's going to get prescribed in those situations. Like, especially if they're, the patient, if they could charge, some of these clinics charge an admin fee to do it and things like that. But if it's if the patient's not willing to pay for that, and it's, and the GP's not kind of set up to do it, it's just never going to get prescribed. It's just too difficult, too complicated. And then once they get that, so then the patient can't walk out with the script that day. So then you have to wait about a week for it to get approved. And then the patient has to come back. You have to explain it to them as per the rules. So you have to write the script out, and then they have to take it to a pharmacy. And then that also creates a lot of headaches, because when I first came here, I was like, I kind of had this thing of like, go to your local pharmacy, they'll sort you out. I want to support I want your pharmacist to, be aware of everything you're taking. But the pharmacists are also confused by it, and it's a lot of work for them. And so then they'll often, sort of create a lot of dramas, and you'll have to answer the phone multiple times from them where they're confused, and they want you to explain the legislation to them, even though they can look it up. And, you're just like, it gets you to the point where you're like, it's not worth it. I don't even want to do it anymore. This is such a headache. I could be way more efficient, do way more things for more people than deal with this nonsense. And so it makes it very difficult. And so it takes a real, I come from Canada, I saw it, it was way easier to prescribe there, and I saw the benefits. So I go through it, but it's sort of reserved. The cannabis prescribers were a very small community, and it's just reserved for people who really kind of, believe in it or are doing research in it. So that's the 2 sides.
Like, what's the rationale for the state permit system? Because like doctors can prescribe quite simply, far more dangerous drugs, right? The doctor can easily prescribe opioids or a number of other drugs that are far more dangerous than cannabis. I don't understand the rationale behind this permit system.
Yeah, it's really weird. It's very, very weird. Exactly, you're right. You could write a morphine script for something that if they took that full script would kill them. Where if they drank their whole bottle, or they smoked as much as they could until they passed out with their medicinal cannabis, they're just going to sleep, and they're going to wake up feeling refreshed, and they're not going to die. Like, you can't overdose. Like, you can maybe do something, go psychotic, and then do something dangerous, but you're not going to overdose. It doesn't affect your breathing. You're not going to die from that. So the rationale, I have no idea. Either it's just to slow things down and create, some barriers. Either they're still if you give them the benefit of the doubt, they're still working out what its role is, and they just want to track it. It's kind of an audit system. Or it's, and the other thing just with the oddness is you apply and you request it. But I mean, at least for me, I've never gotten rejected. And, I started off filling out the forms with lots of detail, really trying to make a case for these things. And now I just write, very minimal stuff, and it's always approved, so that's, you kind of like, why are we doing this? Does someone even look at this? And so it's, so, you do have, or maybe they just get confidence in certain people because they know we've done the right thing for a while. I'm not sure. But yeah, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, and they are overwhelmed. And so this week, they've actually simplified it even more, because there's just so many of these referrals coming in, because there still is a decent amount of people prescribing, and it's overwhelming the TGA. Under their special access scheme, which is what it's under, apparently 95% of their special access schemes, things, and this includes all medications, is for medical cannabis. And so it's just overwhelming their system.
But
right
you spoke about 2, so you need to go through the TGA and get a permit from them, and then you need a state permit. Like, it doesn't seem like the state I'm thinking of it in terms of state politics. Doesn't seem like the state permit makes any sense at all, right? Like,
yeah, it's only in Victoria. Like, it's like it's odd. Yeah, I'm still working it out. It's being new here, and it's just sort of trying to sort out and comply with the rules. I don't want to get pulled up on anything, I guess, at the moment. So I do what I'm supposed to do, but yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, especially knowing how it was done, in other parts of the world, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Well, where can people see you, Dr. Schneider?
Well, I have a clinic in the Mornington Peninsula, I guess you could say, in Frankston. So it's
my area.
Yeah.
This area. Oh, fantastic. Excellent.
Yeah. I'm your local representative. You can call me up if you've got any issues.
There you go. There's your local member right there.
That's fantastic. Excellent. Good to meet you. Yeah, so it's we're just right by the beach. 6 Plowman Place is where, and the clinic's called GastroX. And there's two of us. There's myself and then my colleague Shireen Tabatabai. And so I deal with most of the gut issues, and Shireen deals with the liver issues. And we could and I really restrict myself to prescribing for like the medical cannabis side to my specialty, but there are other clinics. There's one in particular I think it's quite professional and quite good. They're called Canadoc, and they're out in the St. Kilda, kind of the Alfred Hospital area, and they're quite good at to getting people access to it for the moment. But hopefully, I guess it's nice to see these cannabis patients, but it's it'd be nice to actually have see it legalized from a recreational purpose, and then everyone can get access to it, and they don't need to go through the doctors. I think that
that's exactly right. Like as another doctor actually who's in our chat, Dr. Logan actually says about the price. Consults are on average $200 to $250, and then the products are between $150 and $250. That lasts 4 to 6 weeks. And you can't have in your system if you're driving, and there's so many rules and regulations, and it's very, very expensive to use these products. But we thank you so much, Dr. Schneider, for joining us tonight. Yeah. We're at time now, but we are going to show a speeded up version of Saturday's rally. And so, Dr. Chris, if you want to spend this couple of minutes, there's a bunch of questions for you in those chat box. If you want to get in there for those couple of minutes as well, that would be amazing. But thank you so much, Dr. Chris Schneider, for joining us tonight.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
And we are just going to play. I'm not sure if David Limbrick has to go because he does have a media gig tonight.
I'll stay and watch this.
Wonderful. So we're going to show a speeded up version of Saturday's rally in Melbourne. It's pretty amazing. We should have some inspirational music. And obviously we can still talk at this time. David, let's see if we can see you in the crowd.
I'll be somewhere. I'll be near the back, I think.
Well, there was 2 posters with David's face on them. So
was there 2? I only saw one. But
oh, actually, yeah, it was just one. The other one just had a logo.
So is this a drone, Kirsty, or is this someone holding a camera up?
This is actually Sam McClellan from True Arrow Events, and also we are big supporters of Sam's work. So he's done a great job of this. He's a very tall man, but I think he might have had a thing on a stick.
So this is going down Burke Street now.
Yes, yeah, okay. Yes. So you can just see with the time lapse the amount of people. So it was basically from Parliament House all the way down to Flagstaff Gardens. Wow. Never-ending swarm of people. It was amazing.
Wow. Still haven't got to us yet.
No.
This is what I was saying, that people had finished the march before I'd even started, pretty much. So, yeah, wow.
Well, and as Kerry says here, David is featured in Russell Brand's video. I did see that as well. I'm a big fan of Russell Brand.
I only found out about that. People were coming up to me and telling me about it. And I was like, what's going on?
Yeah. But, Russell Brand has actually been fantastic on all of this. Phil says, where can we get a copy? Phil, just go straight to True Arrow Events on Facebook. On YouTube, you'll find Sam's work there. He's done some great videos over the last few years, and he used to host a few events. As Katie says, it was so good. Hopefully bigger this weekend.
God, we still haven't got to us.
It's unbelievable. It's
unbelievable. No, that wasn't Burke Street. Where was that? I don't know. God.
That's now we're on Burke Street, righto.
Yeah. Now we're on Burke Street.
Ben has also shared it in the chat for anyone that wants to actually watch. It's really quite incredible.
I think he stopped here because he couldn't move anymore.
Couldn't move.
He's swimming against the tide.
Yeah.
Well, that is a glorious sight to see.
It's amazing. It's amazing, wasn't it? So yeah, quite different to Sydney. Sydney had some great crowds, but Melbourne really turned it on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, as Grant said, that is insane. And as Craig says, according to the media, only 10,000 people.
No, there's at least 100. Even those counter protesters, one of the guys from them said, I've been trying to figure it out. I reckon it's about 100,000 at least. Even he said that. So
yeah, that's pretty amazing because
he's not going to exaggerate.
No. What he wants to know, John, you might have an answer. How many people were at the Sydney rally? Do you know?
Look, it was, considering that things have not, the clampdown has been nothing like what it's been in Melbourne.
Yes.
And it's lifting here. It was extremely encouraging. I don't think it was as big as this, but it was, it was just like David said, there was people.
Did we just see us? Actually, Richard just mentioned that we might have just seen us just then.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I missed it. We weren't far behind the Virgin Mary, so that was pretty amazing.
All right. Yeah.
As Maria says here, this Saturday she's going to march for our Northern Territory brothers and sisters. They are being locked away up in there in the Northern Territory, which is quite amazing. But yeah, we will conclude this week's event of Liberty Chat. David's going to run off to Paul Murray Live.
Yeah, make sure you watch it tonight.
Make sure you watch Paul Murray Live. John Ruddick, thanks again for joining us, and thank you to our wonderful guests, Professor Sinclair Davidson and Dr. Chris Schneider. Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining us. Make sure to like, share, get to our website, join the party, donate, volunteer, ldp.org.au. Thanks very much, guys. Bye.